Code please.
Welcome to Code Please. In this channel, I try to teach you a little bit about computer programming using the Elixir language. If you find this content useful, please consider subscribing and sharing with your friends. Now let's get into today's video. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This time we're going to start developing a new application, and I've always wanted to toy around with the idea of building a chat application where you could see like instantly what people are typing. Traditionally in chat applications, you only see what other people are typing after they type it, after they press enter and get sent to the server. And most of them you can see that they are typing, but you have no idea what the thought process of those people is, and it will be kind of neat to have this option in a chat application. So I wanted to build a chat application where you could see every keystroke that everyone types as they type it, and even including backspace, going back and erasing stuff. I also wanted to make it have no history, so very privacy focused. If you close the session, you basically lose all the information, and when you rejoin your channels, you basically start from scratch. Only the people that remain there can see what has been typed so far. I might change that a little bit to maybe store the session only on the browser itself. So if you went back to the channel or to the session, you could still see the history, but there was nothing stored on the server itself. So the messages that are not stored are not going to be stored on the server. This is going to be probably a bit of a longer series of videos. This is just part one, where we're going to create the Phoenix application and install the database, and that's pretty much it. We might also generate authentication depending on time, but we'll see how that goes. Let's get started. So the first thing we want to do, as usual, when starting a new project, we want to make sure that we have the latest version of Phoenix installed. So I am going to do mix local.x and upgrade my local x so I can install the phx new mix task and make sure I have the latest version. So mix archive.install x phx new. Right, so now we have the mix script phx new with the version 1.6.2, which is the latest Phoenix version. This is going to make sure that we create Phoenix with the latest version. So let's start with creating our project. Mix phx.new honest chat. I'm going to call it honest chat, even though I might change the name later, but anyways, let's use that. And I'm going to have the source code uploaded to my GitHub account, so you can follow along the source code as we continue to update it throughout the videos in this series. And now that our project is created, we can finally get into the directory and try to start our Phoenix application. As usual, we can do iex -s mix phx.server to start up Phoenix, and you can see immediately that we get a bunch of database connection errors. This is mainly because we didn't install our database yet, and also because the database layer is not configured. So let's stop this, and we need to download Postgres for this, because it's the standard database that comes configured with any Phoenix application that you create. So let's go ahead and install this for Windows in my case. I have a link in the description where you can download Postgres from, and we're going to follow that one. So if we follow this link, we can just download the latest version. In my case, I'm installing version 14. We can just download this Windows x86-64, and we can just save the file to disk. It's going to download, and we can click on it once it finishes. Okay, so I'm not going to follow all the steps because I already have Postgres installed, and I fear it might change anything on my configuration, so I'm not going to do it. You can just basically press next, and you will have Postgres installed. Just make sure to create the password for the Postgres user as Postgres as well, because that will simplify our setup, and that's pretty much it. Another bonus point that you can do, you can go into services on Windows. After you install Postgres, you're going to have the Postgres service here. By default, it's going to start your database every time you start up Windows. That might not be what you want, especially if you do gaming and other intensive like video editing or something like that, where you want all the resources on the computer not to be in use by a database that you don't use all the time. So you might want to change this to a manual startup type, just so the service only starts when you want it to. In this case, I'm going to start it myself because I always have it stopped. And now I can see that Postgres is running. So I can close this. I can close this. And now one thing we want to double check is that our database configuration is correct on Phoenix. So we can pretty much go to dev config, and we can take a look here that we have our repository, our data where it's going to be stored, set up with the username Postgres and the password Postgres. So this, and it's connecting to localhost, and it's using in principle the standard port for Postgres, which is 5432. So everything should be set up in principle. If it's not, drop me a line in the comments. I'll do my best to help you. With this running, we can do mix ecto.setup. And this is going to basically set up our development database for this project. It didn't do anything for me. It was already all created, but for you, it's going to initialize the database, the dev database. And then we can do IEX-X mix phx server, and we should in principle have a proper Phoenix application running. And if we now go to localhost port 4000, we should see our Phoenix application up and running. Right. So now one thing that we are going to need for our chat application is basically the ability to create users and sign in and sign out of our application, because our application is supposed to be a multi-user application, and we want to have basically multiple users and support for that. And the support is going to be on the database. So what we're going to do now is basically run a generator from Mix that basically adds authentication into our application. And this is really easy. All we have to do is mix phx.gen.auth, and this is the task that generates authentication for any Phoenix application. And we're going to tell it to put this under accounts. It's going to be the context, and then we're going to say that we want a schema named user to represent our users, and the database table is going to be called users. So now that our authentication has been generated for us, we need to do a couple of steps just to make sure everything is working. So first one is to try to get all our dependencies again. This is just to make sure that the generator didn't introduce any new libraries into our system. And now we are going to run mix ecto.migrate, because we need the authentication generator basically created some migrations which instruct our database which tables it needs to have with which columns to support the users basically, and we need to migrate our database basically to run that. So mix ecto migrate should migrate anything that is required, and now we can start IES-X mix phx.server, start our application again. And if we go to localhost 4000, we should see this part here as new. And this basically allows us to register new users and log into our application. So let's register a new user. Just going to use a fake email because it doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to use a password as password, which is a fantastic thing that you should always do on the internet. Password needs to be at least 12 characters. So password a couple of times. And we just created our first user on our application. We can go to settings where we can change passwords. So basically this all was generated by the generator, all these views to change password and logging out and logging in. So we can basically log out and log in again, fake@fake.com, and password, and we are logged in again. So just a quick overview of what the generator for authentication did for our project. It basically introduced a bunch of new controllers here. As you can see, we have stuff to allow us to log in, which is the responsibility of this user session controller, and also user registration, which is the one used when we create a new account on the system. User settings, so pretty much a bunch of controllers that allow us to log in and register new users, and also some templates. It probably did put on the root, it put here the user menu as rendered apart, which contains the links to log in and log out and register and whatnot. And then each of the templates are here with all the things. And this supports like resetting your password, sending a confirmation email. It supports a bunch of cool things that they are disabled by default, I think, but you can enable them if you want. So yeah, at the risk of running for too long for this video, I'm gonna cut it here, and then we'll continue on part 2. So I talked a lot about Ecto during this video, especially the tasks that Ecto provides, like creating the database and migrating and whatnot. But I thought about providing a small explanation about what Ecto is actually. And Ecto is a library on the Elixir ecosystem that allows us to abstract ourselves from the underlying database. In our case, in the case of this application, it's Postgres. So we basically have our application running here, and we can set up some code that uses Ecto to query our database to get the users, for instance, or to get any other information that we want to get, or to perform operations on the database. Ecto is basically a set of functions that allows us to manipulate the database without using the SQL language that is traditionally used to interact with databases. And SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and it's a language that was designed so you could query databases. And it looks a bit something like this. This is how you would get one particular line from a table called users, where the ID of that user is 1. And Ecto allows us to transform code like, for instance, get user 1 into this SQL language that the database then understands. It also abstracts us away from the database type that we have. We could be using Postgres, MySQL, or any other type of information, any other type of database, and we could even like swap it if we wanted, and we wouldn't need to change our code because of Ecto. And there are 3 main concepts in Ecto. The first one being repo, which is a module that contains top-level operations like retrieving all from a particular table, or retrieving just one value, or there's a bunch of other handling transactions, things like that. There's also the schema module, and this is what you use to directly map a struct in Elixir into a table on the database. It contains things like the fields of the table. It can contain validations, constraints that you might have on your schema, like unique keys or indices. It also contains relations to other schemas or database tables. Say you have, I don't know, say a user can have multiple emails. You could have a table for users and another table for the emails of those users. And the relationship between these 2 tables could be handled in schema. So you could do stuff like user.emails, and Ecto would know how to basically, well, you would need to put some plumbing in place, but Ecto would know how to get the emails from the other table and associate them with the user. So this is very practical. And finally, there's a third concept in Ecto, which is the change set, which represents changes that you want to perform into the database. So whenever you create a new user, for instance, you create a change set with the new attributes that you want for that user. And then the change set also handles running the schema validations in there. So it's in sort of an abstraction for operations that you want to perform on the database. So this is kind of a high-level overview of what Ecto gives you. And why is it so good? Because it can abstract you from the database basically, and you can keep focusing on your Elixir language. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on part 2. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and liking and sharing with your friends. It really helps the channel to grow. Thank you.